Hi, I'm Lucia Chappelle, and I am delighted today to be with my very good friend. Now, this is full disclosure right up front, because part of the story is the fact that we are old friends. Steve, tell us a little bit about what led up to your being eye to eye with the eyes of Tammy Faye.
Well, I got very sick in 1982 with what AIDS was then called GRID. I was told I had GRID by Dr. Joel Weissman, who you sent me to. You referred me to him, as you may recall.
He was my doctor.
I moved to Los Angeles in 1982 and I was getting sick, and you said you need to go see Dr. Weissman. And so I did. You were my next door neighbor for a couple of years there. And,
Yeah.
So I got very sick over the next year. I had all at one time, I had hepatitis, CMV, pneumonia, and mononucleosis, herpes, shingles, strep throat, a variety of fungal infections, including, do you remember that fungal infection on the bottom of my right foot that caused these huge, painful blisters?
My brother, I still have the roasting pan you soaked your foot in.
They had me
finish all pitted.
I know.
I don't know what they had you soaking your foot in.
They had me soaking it in ice like 5 times a day. And I remember you literally holding my hand to keep my foot in the ice at first because it was so painful. But then the ice took effect and it reduced the pain. So I got into the habit of doing it. I did that for about 9 months. And then I think the final thing that I soaked it in was a potassium solution. And that, I don't know what caused the pits in your roasting pan, but you know, it could.
I think that'll do it.
Yeah, yeah, and it was a horrible. And I was told by a dermatologist that I went to see for it that it was something he hadn't seen since he was a medic in the South Pacific in World War II, and that it was a fungal infection that was caused by walking barefoot in sheep dung in New Zealand. Well, I had never been to New Zealand, and certainly never walked barefoot in sheep dung, but I had this, I mean, and that's what happened to people with AIDS back in those.
Well, yeah, all these crazy things. Yeah. How did you possibly get that?
And there was so much fear around it. And I was so grateful for your friendship, because it was you and the women of De Colores MCC, the women's MCC at the time, who took care of me, who brought me my groceries and kept me company and taught me about the rhythms of the body and the rhythms of illness, and prepared me in so many different ways for what was coming. And what came was a diagnosis of stage 4 lymphoma and Kaposi sarcoma. And that gave me finally my full diagnosis of AIDS. The definition of AIDS changed so much back in those days. They hadn't even discovered the virus yet. And so they were hunting around. And that was why there was so much fear. I mean, I remember it took me 3 months to find a deacon from MCC in the Valley who would even bring me communion, because there was so much fear about coming into my house. But you were there every day.
Day after day.
We watched a lot of movies on the Z channel.
Oh God, a million movies, and MASH every night before going to bed.
Yes.
You know.
Right.
But now during that time though, you weren't just being sick, you also had begun writing.
Oh, I did.
And writing about the experience.
Yes. I was the first member of the clergy in MCC to be diagnosed with AIDS.
More full disclosure, Steve and I were both clergy in MCC at the time.
That's how I first met you in 1979. I heard you preach an amazing sermon at the General Conference. Anyway, so where were we?
Starting to write.
Starting to write. Oh, that's right. Paula Shaneweather, Nancy Wilson's wife, who Nancy Wilson was the was she the pastor of MCC?
No, she was still a member of De Coloris and was clerk of the Board of Elders.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
And Paula, her wife, was the editor, publisher of Journey magazine, MCC's denominational magazine. And she invited me right after I was diagnosed to start writing about my experiences, to share what it was like to be a person with AIDS in 1984, and 1982 and 83 as well. But it really started in 84 that I started writing the magazine articles. And I published 9 articles in Journey magazine over the next year or so about what it was like to have AIDS.
And from a Christian perspective,
Yeah, oh yes, very definitely.
you know, go ahead.
No, that it was, my faith became so important to me in dealing with my diagnosis. When I was diagnosed as terminal in April of '84, Reverend Ken Martin, who at the time was the pastor of MCC in the Valley, invited me to preach the Easter sermon 2 weeks after I was diagnosed. And I remember telling him, no, you mean Good Friday, don't you? I'm dying. And he said, no, you need to preach Easter. And it was an incredibly valuable gift to, meditate on and look at what it meant to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ as a person who was facing death from this horribly stigmatized disease. And what it meant to me was that if God is greater than the death of Jesus on the cross, then God is greater than AIDS. And if God is greater than AIDS, then that means that in spite of them telling me the worst thing they could possibly tell me, I could still dance. And I did a little shuffle off the buffalo right in front of the pulpit to prove it. And in my Easter sermon, and they loved it, and so I decided that my faith enabled me to be fully alive, even with AIDS. And I had an incredible doctor at the time, she's still my doctor, Dr. Alexandra Levine. And she told me that not everybody was going to die from AIDS. It looked like that back then. But she said, if 1 in a million people survive AIDS, why not believe you're going to be that 1 in a million and act accordingly? And so I set out to create the conditions for medication to work should it become available. And I set out to stay alive long enough for them to find a way to manage HIV, what came to be known as HIV disease. Yeah.
So you started writing, you're writing in the MCC magazine.
Right.
And you started speaking.
Yes.
Going around and speaking.
Yes.
And making a name for yourself.
Yeah, I did. And I did a lot of interviews. I became a client of AIDS Project Los Angeles, and they put me in front of the TV cameras fairly quickly because they knew that I had a lot of experience talking to the media about being gay in Hartford, Connecticut, when I was the pastor of the MCC in Hartford. Anyway, that was training
another story.
yeah, that's another story altogether. Anyway, yeah, so that was my training ground, and I ended up doing a lot of interviews for APLA, and most of those interviews in the early days were done in the alley beside AIDS Project Los Angeles. They put me on a chair in the alley, and they filmed, or they had a camera on me and an earpiece and a mic so that I could be heard and hear what's going on back in the studio, where all the other panelists who didn't have AIDS were, all the doctors and the host and all of that. And I did that kind of interview frequently, and I got a kick after a while of at the end of the interview, taking the earpiece off and taking off the mic and handing it back to the sound person, who would inevitably go, no, you keep it. You throw it away or do whatever you want with it, but you keep it. Yeah. And so,
So they wouldn't even let you in studios.
no, they wouldn't. They wouldn't let me in the studio because the camera crew would not work if I came in the studio. There was still that much fear about, I can maybe get it from being in the same room with a person with AIDS, which of course is ridiculous. We know that
You
now.
know
But
that now.
back then, it
Mhm.
took a lot of education to persuade other people otherwise. Yeah.
And then one day, after you had become somewhat known around as a Christian minister who could speak about AIDS, you got a call.
I did indeed. But wait, I
Okay.
have to talk about the context of that call.
Yes, yes.
I was doing a drug called Suramin. It was the very first antiviral drug they tried against HIV. And I was patient number 1 on the drug. And within 6 weeks, my KS went away and my stage 4 lymphoma, both of cancers, went into complete remission.
KS is Kaposi sarcoma.
Kaposi sarcoma.
It's not part of our common language anymore.
No, that's right. But back then it sure was.
Yeah.
It was one of the 5 defining diseases of AIDS. And so anyway, so my cancers went into remission, and they put 89 other people on the drug around the country in the for the trial. And it proved to be disastrous. A number of people were actually killed by the drug. Everybody else died from the progression of HIV and AIDS within a year or so, except one other person who only took it for 4 weeks. I took it for 39 weeks, and it very nearly killed me. And when I was dying from the effects of the drug, they finally figured out that my adrenal glands had failed, and they called me into the hospital one evening and said, "You've got to come in now or you're going to be dead by morning." And they had finally figured that out. And so I went in, and indeed I had my first near-death experience that night. And then they started giving me hydrocortisone, and I was back in my body, and I was pissed. But anyway, because it was so great on the other side, it was so peaceful and wonderful. Anyway, so that was the context in which I got a phone call like the next week after I had begun recovering from that. I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was the executive director at the AIDS Project in Atlanta, Reverend Ken South. And he said, "Tammy Faye Bakker's producers are looking for somebody, a gay man with AIDS, a gay Christian with AIDS, to be interviewed by her on PTL. And can I give her your number because I think you'd be perfect for it?" And I said, "Well, sure, why not?" And I mean, I'd had a lot of experience debating conservative Christians. And so her producer called me, and they were going to send me, first of all, I wanted them to do it live. That was a prerequisite, and they agreed to that right away. But then they sent me 2 first-class plane tickets to fly to Charlotte, North Carolina, because I was still recovering from that near-death experience. And Reverend Nancy Radcliffe, who was my chaplain at the time, she was going to go with me and help me, survive all of the trip and everything.
Now, you are skipping over a little part, Steve. When you got the call, and I came by that evening, and you said, "Guess what?"
Oh, you tell it. This is great. Yeah.
"I'm going to be interviewed by Tammy Faye Bakker." And we looked at each other and we fell on the floor laughing.
We did indeed.
We laughed so hard. I don't know how many minutes. We just sat there laughing, tears rolling down our cheeks. We laughed so hard. And why was it funny?
Well, it was funny because we had watched her on PTL. She and we'd watch her and Jim Bakker on their network PTL. And when we weren't laughing out loud at their antics, we were slack-jawed at their theology and the just we watched in disbelief at the way people responded to them and sent them, blank checks practically, but Tammy particularly was an object of ridicule in the LGBT community, at least among a lot of the people I knew. And she was a caricature. She was a cartoon character. And so that's why we laughed uproariously.
It was so incongruous, just trying to imagine projecting yourself into that environment.
Yes.
That evangelical circus kind of environment. Now, this was after their rise and fall, right? This is after.
No, this was before their fall.
This is before the fall.
My interview with her turned out to be, I've been told over and over again through the years, that it was the turning point. It was the straw that broke the camel's back for Jerry Falwell. And that's how it's portrayed in the movie, that Jerry Falwell is actually backstage listening to Tammy interview me, and he loses it. This has got to stop. She's got to be stopped. This is awful, because he's already established early in the film that he is very much against the homosexual agenda, and that was more Nixon than Falwell.
Well,
it was all the same, anyway.
Yeah.
So Falwell started really seriously plotting to bring down Jim and Tammy because of that interview. My interview, I'm told, and it was not the only factor, but it was certainly a factor that it was a historic moment in terms of PTL and the conservative Christian televangelistic movement.
Let's talk a little bit about the movie. What's it like to be in a movie? Tell us about how they approached you.
They didn't approach me. They found my interview. Jessica Chastain, who plays Tammy Faye and is an executive producer of the movie, did a lot of research on Tammy Faye. She took 9 or 10 years bringing this project to fruition, and she did a lot of research and watched a lot of videos. And she told me that it was my interview with Tammy Faye that persuaded her to do the film. She made the decision to do the film when she saw how loving and caring and affirming Tammy Faye was with me. And what a loving interview it was. So anyway, so they went to make the film, and the reason she was able to find it is because of YouTube. My original interview with Tammy Faye is on YouTube and has been for a number of years. And so they didn't approach me. I learned about it from Jim and Tammy's son, Jay Bakker, who found me on Instagram at the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020. And he wanted to interview me on his podcast, Loosen the Bible Belt, because he told me on air that my interview changed not only Tammy, but him and the entire Bakker family, because she started taking him at age 10 and his sister to MCCs and to other LGBT affirming churches. She started taking them to LGBT pride parades. She started taking them to hospitals and hospices to visit people with AIDS. And she suddenly understood herself as having an affinity for the LGBT community. And in later years, she talked about how after that interview, she began to realize that that she had a home among the LGBT community. And when everything fell apart on PTL and for the Bakkers, she often said that it was the LGBT community that saved her, that really, helped
Isn't
her.
that interesting?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Saved her in what way? I mean, through
Saved her in
contact.
terms of helping her to survive all that happened. I mean, she fell back into, I mean, I've since heard from a number of gay men who were her friends in the 90s, after everything fell apart. And they told me that they really were the ones who took care of her. And then as she got sick, she suffered from cancer for 10 years before she died from it. And they were there for her. The gay men in Palm Springs particularly were there for her, but all over, everywhere she went, she found the gay community and was more comfortable with them than with a lot of other people.
And it is so funny because on the one hand, you've got this person who dresses like a Cupid doll and
and wears outrageous makeup
and is such a stage personality in that way, so much like a drag queen.
Exactly.
So much like a drag queen. And so while the opposites were so strong, that's opposites so often clash together.
Yeah.
And you find out they're the same thing.
Yeah.
And maybe some homophobia is rooted in that sense of affinity.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I have often been told by reliable sources that the way she questioned me in that interview about what made me think I had to be gay, what made me think there was no hope for me to be straight, that she grilled me about that. And a number of people who are in the know would say that she was trying to work out issues in her own marriage when she was asking me that. Because later, of course, we learned that Jim was rumored to have same-sex liaisons. And indeed, in the movie, you get that hint pretty strongly. So, yeah, so she was trying to work something out for herself in asking me about why I thought I had to be gay.
And that's why, and I've said this to you before, the reason the interview worked, again, now, okay, let's set this up. We are still laughing. Hysterically.
I came
all
home
the way up.
And before the interview, word got out that I was going to do it. And I remember hearing from people I respected that I shouldn't do the interview because it would make a fool of me and it would ruin my reputation to be on her show and to have a conversation with her about all this.
Participate in support and encourage this, behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's in a way that it would be a affirmation. Speaking of welcoming and affirming.
Yeah.
And you'll go ahead.
No, but I was going to tell your audience about the fact that when I came home from the interview, you came over and we fell apart again. And I told you, oh my God, I did such a terrible job. I wish I'd said this and I hadn't said that. I wish I'd put this better. And I wish she hadn't asked me about this. And oh my God, it was just terrible. I'm so glad nobody I know will ever see it.
Well, and what I wanted to say about it is the way, having seen you in action as a clergy person, I recognized so much You spoke to Tammy Faye as though she were the slightly ditzy old maid aunt of an MCC congregant,
Yeah.
trying to understand why her dear nephew was this way.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
pastored her.
Well,
You didn't just let her interview you.
no, I felt like I needed to take care of her somehow, and I tried to in some way. I tried to remember that she was having a hard time talking about all this. I mean, as far as I knew, it was the first time she'd ever talked to a person with AIDS, let alone a gay man with AIDS. And when she got to that portion of the interview, she got pretty emotional. And but even before that, um, when I said, I think it was when I said, Jesus loves me just the way I am. Jesus loves the way I love. She was caught up short by that. And there was this pause, and she gathered herself together and said, this is a very emotional interview for me. I want to reach out and put my arms around Steve. And I said, well, I want to put my arms around you too, Tammy Faye. And then she said, so what makes you so did you ever have a sexual relationship with a woman? So I mean, it was like
And what did you say to that?
I said, no, that was not the path that God was leading me on. I thought it would be disrespectful of the woman. And later, Troy Perry, the founder and moderator of one-time moderator of our MCC denomination, he told me, I knew that the Holy Spirit was at work in that interview when you said that it would be disrespectful of the woman, because that's exactly how her audience would need to hear it. And I've never heard you say anything like that before, Steve. So, but so.
It was truly, I mean, there were truly inspired moments
Yeah.
in that exchange. And that's why, and so you said, thank God no one I know will ever see it.
Yeah.
And now all of these years later, not only is somebody inspired to do a movie, but you've heard from lots and lots of people that seeing that interview made a major difference for them.
Absolutely. I've had people sit down next to me at a restaurant and tell me, I saw your interview with Tammy Faye Bakker in 1985, and it saved my life. I was 12 years old, and I realized I was gay, and I lived in this household where my mother had PTL on 24 hours a day. And I thought I could never be gay. I would have to kill myself. And you saved me from committing suicide, because I found out I could be gay and Christian from that interview. And I've had a lot of people tell me how profoundly it affected them in their personal growth as a lesbian, a gay man, a transgender person, bisexual. It made a difference to a lot of people.
And well, that's I think it says somewhere, or somewhere I read, the foolish things of the world confound the wise.
Yeah, indeed, right.
And here we thought this was such a foolish thing.
Yeah.
And we even thought, I mean, you were embarrassed about how you came off in the interview when you first got home from it.
Yeah.
When we saw it, we were like, oh, Tammy, my gosh.
I know. I mean, she asked what you and I did consider to be pretty silly questions, pretty stupid questions, but I realized with time that they were exactly the right questions for her audience, and for her. Yeah. It really kind of like died down after the interview happened. I didn't hear much about it after that for a while. And then at the 1987 International General Conference of the MCC denomination in Miami, Troy played the video, the Tammy Faye video, as the opening of the entire conference. And I sat there in the audience just squirming and going, oh my God, I can't believe they're listening to, oh my God, I did such a bad job. I didn't say that, did I? And then the whole audience stood up and cheered, and I was sitting next to Ken Martin, and he turned and he gave me a great big kiss on the cheek, and Troy called me forward, and I went forward and waved at the crowd, and he said, just wave at the crowd now. You're not going to speak, but wave at the crowd. And so I did. And ever after that, I suddenly started getting invited to come preach at all kinds of different churches and conferences. And everywhere I went, I had to bring the Tammy Faye tape to play for the church or the conference. And every single time I squirmed, I thought, oh God. And every single time the audience or the congregation would start giggling at the beginning of it, and by the time the interview was over, they would be cheering or crying or both. And you know, I got really tired of it, but the congregation, the people who wanted to see it wanted to watch me watching it. And I began
Yeah,
to understand that after a while. So I began to get a better attitude about it after a while. But it wasn't until recently that I began to know that this had a huge impact on people.
well, for Jay Bakker to say it changed their entire family, and she started taking them to MCCs, and it happened at such a, and we're talking about this is like the queer significant part of this movie, and it's not all that long in the movie itself.
Oh no.
But as a historic moment in evangelical Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
it really, I mean, it turned out to be a major thing.
Yeah, it did.
It turned out to be a major thing. It shook the evangelical world. It tore apart Jerry Falwell and the Bakkers. And if you recall, Falwell ended up taking over
That's right.
their, a bunch of their property after they got busted.
Well, all of which you see in the movie.
So yeah, it's like another time where, the queer in the woodpile.
Yeah, right.
Makes the difference, when we are acknowledged and when we are not.
Yeah.
Something about our presence can be transformative.
Transformative, exactly. Putting a human face on it. I mean, Harvey Milk in the 70s, that was his rallying cry, was
Yes.
Come out.
Yes.
Come out to your postal deliverer, come out to your grocery clerks, come out to your parents, come out to your children, come out to your minister and to your, everybody. And when we put a human face on being LGBTQ and then on having AIDS, it changes people. People have to stop and think, oh my God, this is somebody's child. This is somebody's parent, or brother or sister or whatever, but this is a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have any sensitivity at all, it makes you stop and think, and it can be transformative. Absolutely, good word for it. Yeah. So
go ahead.
one of the things that I forgot to put in to add was that I was telling you about how we were going to fly first class.
I was just going to bring you back to that.
Yeah. Nancy and I were supposed to fly first class to Charlotte, North Carolina to do the interview live. And at the last minute, literally, as Nancy came over to drive me to the airport and to drive us to the airport. And as we were walking out the door, the phone rang, and it was Tammy's producer saying, Tammy's sick, and so she's canceling the interview. Please send back the tickets. So we were very disappointed it wasn't going to happen. And we sent back the tickets. And then the next day, I got another phone call from the producer saying, Tammy's feeling a lot better and she wants to do the interview, but we're going to do it because we're worried about you traveling in your condition. We're going to do it at a studio in Southern California, a TV studio, and we're going to do the first ever satellite hookup that PTL has ever done. And we're very excited about that. And the producer and her husband flew out, and Nancy drove me out to the studio, which was in Ontario, California. And I went into this studio while Nancy went with the producer and her husband into the control booth. I went into this studio and sat down in this dark studio with lights on me, of course, but no monitor. I couldn't see Tammy. She could see me, but I couldn't see her. I just had this earpiece, which kept falling out, as you know, anybody who watches.
As they do.
And I didn't have my earrings to hook them on, you know. But anyway, that's another story. Anyway, Tammy came on. I was hooked up to Tammy to make sure that we had the right connection. And she said, hi, Steve, I'm so grateful that you are so courageous to come on this show with me. And I know that it can't be easy, you know, and I'm thrilled that you're willing to talk with me about it. And so we just kind of chatted for 3 minutes before the actual interview. And she was gracious and warm as could be, you know, she was wonderful. And I knew that it was going to be okay after we talked those 3 minutes before the interview.
Because there was also always the possibility that she was going to get you in there and condemn you to hell.
Exactly.
Although, I mean, she was so much more a flowery butterfly-like Christian, but still, one didn't know if she might kindly and sweetly and warmly invite you to go to hell.
Right.
You know?
And she got in a lot of trouble for being so positive and affirming of me. She was forced, I am told, to interview a Christian psychiatrist who converts gays to heterosexuality by converting them to Jesus. You know, and they made her do that interview the next week on her show to make up for, you know, the heresy that she had done with interviewing me in such a positive way. Yeah.
Wow. And she agreed to do that. I mean,
yeah. Well,
change doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And I'm sure the pressures were tremendous. I also wanted to point out too that when the interview started, she made a big deal out of the fact that you weren't excluded from her studio because people thought they might catch something.
She said, we didn't want you here to come fly here to Charlotte. We were going to fly you to Charlotte, but we decided not to because we thought it would be too hard on you and you had to get back for your chemotherapy. You know, that could have been true. But what I learned later was that they were afraid that I would not be well treated by the staff at Heritage Hotel and in the studio, and that maybe the camera crew wouldn't work there either. So that's why I wasn't flown to Charlotte, North Carolina for.
But in Hollywood, you could find someone who could do almost anything.
Yeah. So, yeah. And it just kept reverberating through the years until this film happened. And I found out about the film from Jay Bakker, their son, who told me, you know, Jessica Chastain is making this movie and she's playing Tammy Faye, and your interview is central to the movie. And I don't know that it's central to the movie, but it is a turning point in the movie. But Jay told me about it, and I thought, I wonder if they know I'm still alive, you know, a person with AIDS in 1980.
Yeah.
You know, so I wrote to the studio. I had no idea who I was writing to, but I found a contact email for Searchlight Pictures. And I wrote, and the publicist for the film, Melissa Holloway, wrote me back and said, "We're delighted to hear from you." And I said, "Hey, I'm still alive, you know," and here I am. So yeah, and it developed from there. So.
And so you've been really part of the publicity for the film now.
Right. I've been doing a lot of interviews, and the studio is flying me to New York City for the red carpet premiere.
Wow.
September 14th. And I'm flying out a day early and so I can rest before the big festivities. And then I'm going to walk the red carpet with Jessica Chastain and Andrew Garfield and Vincent D'Onofrio and Jerry Jones. And and Randy Havens, who plays me. I'm hoping he'll be there at least. I'd love to have a picture with him. Randy, for those of you who may not know, Randy Havens is a regular on Stranger Things. It's the Netflix TV series, and he plays Mr. Clark, the science teacher and audiovisual teacher. He has quite a following. He was also in one of the Godzilla movies, and he has my friend Allison told me that he has a really good reputation in Hollywood as a really good actor. And it was kind of surreal watching. I got to see the film a month or so ago, and it was kind of surreal to see somebody saying my exact words, an actor playing me, talking to Jessica Chastain playing Tammy Faye. What do I make of this? And then at the end, they have a "Where Are They Now" section, and they have Tammy Faye died in 2007, and Jerry Falwell died in 2004, and Jim Bakker went to prison for X number of years, and Tammy's mother died, and blah, blah, blah. And Steve Pieters, the person with AIDS, I mean, they don't say the person with AIDS, but Steve Pieters is singing with the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles. And they have this huge picture of me up on the screen, the real me. And it's like, oh my God, I'm in a movie. Jeez. It is just too bizarre. It is wonderful and bizarre.
And the road to get there is so crazy.
Who would have
thought? Who would have thought?
If I'd told you back then in '85, well, I think that this is going to be a groundbreaking historic interview that will eventually be part of a feature film about Tammy Faye and Jim Bakker. You probably would have looked at me like, "What have you been smoking?"
Really, HIV done got to his brain.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Cross the blood-brain barrier. Yeah.
And that's the magic of it. It's like you were saying, it's the magic of coming out. You never know.
You never know.
You never know what chain of events you're going to set off in sometimes the most unlikely situations.
Tell me. I know, it's just bizarre, and I mean, so many thoughts are flashing through my head about the whole experience, and talking about it with you, who was, the first interviewer I've talked to who was actually there with me when it happened, and who not incidentally saw me through a lot of the worst illnesses I've ever experienced. You really did. And you deserve a lot of credit for that. But I'm just, I'm gobsmacked by what's happened. I mean, a couple of years ago, a number of us leaders in MCC, historic leaders, were asked by Troy Perry to put together materials to donate to the Smithsonian, the National Museum of American History, and I put all my AIDS ministry materials together. And then I saw my fairy wand, which I used to carry with me everywhere I went to preach, to talk about the importance of believing in fairies, because fairies die when people don't believe in them, and there were a lot of good fairies dying, and it was important for us to believe in ourselves and believe in each other. And I thought, do I keep this on my shelf where I can see it and treasure it and all that, or do I put it in the box to go to the Smithsonian? And I thought, on the shelf. The Smithsonian. So into the box it went. This is a duplicate.
I was going to say you had more than one fairy wand.
I did. Oh, of course, of course. So yeah, and I remember I went out to Washington, D.C. for the ceremony when Troy donated the artifacts to the Smithsonian, which was an amazing event, and just an amazing couple of days. And I remember flying back from Washington thinking, I will never be able to top this. I mean, you know, this is it. That was the peak. And now all of this with Tammy Faye. I mean, oh my God, what's next? You know, next is my memoir.
And when you get your memoir done, I'm sure we'll be talking about it.
Yeah, well, I finished it, and it's in the hands of my literary agent now, who's pitching it to different publishers. And we'll see.
Well then, Steve, thank you so much for being with us on This Way Out.
Oh, my pleasure, my honor, my joy.
And this was a lot of fun. I told them it would be.
Yeah, it was. I knew it would be. It's Lucia.
It's Steve.
My old friend Lucia.
You know,
yeah.
BFF.
Yeah, exactly. BFF. Yeah. All right.
And we look. Oh, when does the movie come out again?
It is the New York City premiere, the red carpet event, is the 14th of September, but the film is being released to the general public on September 17th, Friday, September 17th.
And is it going to be theaters only, or
well, the last I heard, it was going to be in theaters only, but with the way the variants are going and all that's happening, I don't know if they can really get away with that, or whether they'll have to give it to streaming services, or we'll see.
Well,
yeah.
Keep up with us on This Way Out, and we will let you know when that happens.
Thank you so much, Lucia.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, and good luck, and congratulations.
Thank you.
You know, not only did you make it through, you triumphed.
I know. God, what a triumph. Oh,
amazing. I've been talking with Steve Pieters, who is a character featured in the upcoming movie, The Eyes of Tammy Faye. For This Way Out, I'm Lucia Chappelle.